Have you ever stopped to think about who was the man that wore the first gold cloth in history? Long before Shion or Mu even dreamed of existing. And why is he the only one who doesn't belong to the lineage of the Movians? This happens in the first holy war in history, where the gold cloths were forged in a pact of blood and agony, and that the first man to wear the Aries cloth was so powerful that his main technique could open the gates of heaven itself. Hello, knights and Amazons. Welcome to the channel. Always wanted to know. And in today's video, I'm going to show you the mysteries of the mythological era of Saint Seiya. Let's talk about a figure who dwells in the shadows of legends and the lost sketches of history. Merkabah of Aries. Did you enjoy the topic? Click like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's dive into the video. When we think of the Aries knight, the image that comes to mind is that of Mu Xian, or even the young Kiki. They all share striking physical features: light-colored hair, or two dots on their foreheads, which are marks of the race from the continent of Lemuria, or the continent of Mu, and also an almost unshakable serenity. However, Merkaba breaks this paradigm violently. With his long red hair that looks like flames coming out of a forge, and a much more robust physical stature, Merkaba repeats. He represents the period when Athena's order was still being shaped. He was not a Movian. According to the records from the mythological eras, he was one of the first human beings to fully awaken the seventh sense, without the help of masters or special bloodlines. He was a born warrior whose ancestral authority surpassed even the greatness of Shion at his peak. As the Grand Master of the Sanctuary, to understand the role of Merkaba, we need to place ourselves in the first holy war against Poseidon. At that time, Athena's soldiers were being massacred by the Marina generals, who wore the famous arcane scales, or arx hyles, protections made of an unknown material which human armor could not penetrate. Athena, seeing the suffering of her protégés, sought the help of the alchemist of Mo. But Merkaba was the one responsible for this mission. The most accepted theory among fans of the work is that Merkaba not only wore the Aries armor, but also helped define the sacred alchemy that makes up the garments: orichalcum, stardust, and germanium. It was said that Merkaba's Aries armor shone with a more reddish shade of gold, almost as if the metal were permanently glowing. This being the purest form of this garment, it could also be considered the arcane armor of Aries. This happened because he was responsible for baptizing the armors on the battlefield, using his own cosmos. To repair the damage to his companions while the fight was still going on, his Jimmu needs tools and time. In Jamiel, Merkaba performed repairs in real time, restoring the divine metal with the strength of his cosmos. The name Merkaba evokes the throne of God, or the celestial vehicle of Jewish mysticism. This gives us a clue about his strength, his main technique. The Heke Halat is a reference to the 7 celestial palaces. In terms of narrative combat, it is theorized that the Heke Halat was not just a striking blow. When hit, the opponent was forced. There is a spiritual journey through 7 dimensions of pure divine judgment. Each palace would take away one of the enemy's senses or confront them with their own sins. Thus, at the end of this technique, the opponent would lose even the 7th sense. And upon reaching the 7th palace, the opponent's soul would stand before the glory of God. An explosion of light so intense that it would disintegrate not only the physical body, but the very spiritual essence of your opponent. It was the primitive and much more lethal version of what was later derived, the treasure of heaven, which was later used by the Virgo Knights. One of his most legendary battles would be the massacre of Poseidon's first marinas. With the shores of Attica being invaded by Poseidon's troops, the inexperienced warriors fell one by one. Merkabah, as the first gold saint, was the pillar that held back the advance of the Marine army. It is believed that Merkabah faced several original Marina generals simultaneously, while the other saints focused on defense. Merkabah used the unique characteristic of his constellation, the crystal wall, but his version of the technique was described as the crystal requerelot, a barrier that not only reflected attacks, but also trapped enemies in a gigantic crystal palace shaped like a labyrinth. He was the one responsible for stopping Poseidon's advance. It was enough time for Athena to prepare Athena's amphora. This was the sacred seal used to imprison the soul of the god of the seas. For the first time in history, however, a warrior of such magnitude would not die of old age. The death of Merkabah is one of the most debated topics in advanced theories. The most accepted hypothesis is that he perished at the climax of the mythological war against Aries. The death of Merkabah occurred at the height of the conflict against Aries, the god of war. Enraged by the resistance of the humans, he summoned a storm of divine flames that aimed to melt all of Athena's armors at once. If the armors were destroyed at that moment, humanity would be wiped out. Merkabah, sensing that the end was near, made a drastic decision. He positioned himself at the center of the sanctuary and raised his cosmos until he reached Arayashik, the eighth sense, something almost impossible for that time. He didn't use the Hecker Halat to attack, but to create a dimensional vacuum. He transformed his own soul and his armor into a portal that sucked in all the destructive energy of Aries. The process was devastating. To keep the portal open and save the other 87 armors, Merkabah allowed his own blood and spirit to be consumed. At the final moment, there was an explosion of white light so intense that it temporarily blinded both allies and enemies. When the light dissipated, Aries had been repelled. But Merkabah was no longer there. His Aries armor remained on the ground. But it was different. It had absorbed part of Merkabah's essence, becoming sentient and able to recognize. Who would have the gift of armor repair in the future? After Merkabah's death and the end of the mythological era, the task of protecting the House of Aries and repairing the sacred garments passed on to the survivors of the continent of Mu. They inherited the tools and manuscripts left by Merkabah, but they were never able to replicate them. The Hecker Halat crystal technique, which was lost over time, was simplified into the crystal wall technique of Zion and Mu that we know, in addition to the Hecker Halat technique, which is also a primary technique, to the treasure of the heavens of the Virgo sign Merkaba. It remains as a reminder that at the beginning of everything, the sanctuary was a place of brutal sacrifices and powers that defied the logic of the gods themselves. He was the first to prove that a human endowed with willpower and the right stellar protection could face an Olympian as an equal. His eyebrows were normal, unlike the Movians, which reinforces that he came from a different human lineage, possibly from the nomadic tribes of ancient Mesopotamia. It is theorized that he was Athena's closest military advisor before the position of Grand Master was formally created. This character was created by the French artist named Space Weaver. The figure of an Aries knight who doesn't follow the Mu pattern brings enormous richness to the Saint Seiya universe. We've already seen this happen in the Saint Seiya Gaiden mangas from Lost Canvas, where knights like Gate Guard of Aries and Avenir existed. So, what did you think of this theory based on the mythological era? Can you imagine the impact it would have if Mark of the Battery appeared in a new official Saint Seiya manga? Leave a comment so I can know. Thank you for watching until the end. See you next time. Burn your cosmos to infinity.